Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this session. My name is Niblett. I'm the director of Chatham House, the Royal Institute of International Affairs in London. It's my very great pleasure to welcome you to this session on rethinking the Eurozone. Perhaps it's appropriate to have a Brit outside the Eurozone help with the chairing of this particular session. This is a very exciting for analysts in think tanks, but difficult and dangerous for politicians of the caliber that we have here at this table. A very difficult moment for them to be able to cope with. For an institution, a Eurozone, that was established somewhat and designed to try to avoid the creation of crises in the first place. Eurozone that was established, I think, and has lived through a period of growth is now facing a period of crisis, and this is a very different challenge for its leaders to undertake. There are many who've said that the Eurozone helped a number of the European countries cope with the crisis. However, it also appears to be imposing constraints, a high euro in particular, a drive now to quickly reduce deficits as quickly as possible. Certainly we've had countries who've been able to devalue outside the Eurozone, but within the European Union, including Britain, who perhaps have been able to benefit a little bit in this post-crisis mode. And there's the question of the future. Are we through the crisis, or might there be a second wave of some sort? So there are many non-performing loans across the Eurozone, and as you all know here, governments carrying very, very large debt levels, accumulated debt levels, as well as very high deficits. In any case, the World Economic Forum has drawn together a superb lineup of leaders to be able to discuss this issue with you today. We're sorry that President Kaczynski cannot be with us, as he has been held up, as a number of people I think have been, by the snow that's been falling since this morning. But we have three leaders, each of whom have been navigating the storm, either as national leaders or as the president of the European Central Bank. And what I'm going to do is obviously engage in some questions with them and hopefully then turn it over to the audience for the last 15 minutes or so. So let me get straight in, and I'm going to start with Mr. Zapatero. I'm going to start with a series of questions about whether the economies of these three countries that to a large extent have been in the eye of the storm, maybe more than others, how they're coping today. Are we out of the eye of the storm? Spain is a country that went through a decade of very rapid economic expansion, but it's one that is now facing some pretty high unemployment levels, trade deficit position. And I'd be very interested to know, Mr. Zapatero, how is your economy coping at the moment? And then we'll turn around to questions of the Eurozone in our second question. First to you.
Bien, muchas gracias. Primero que deseo afirmar es que el euro ha sido un proyecto de éxito.
Let me just ask, Mr. Prime Minister, do we need to translate for him, or can people hear?
Okay. Muy bien.
Continúe, por favor.
Sí, no. La primera afirmación que deseo hacer es que el euro es un proyecto de éxito, que ha sido, es y será una moneda fuerte y que ha dado estabilidad de precios, ha disciplinado fiscalmente y ha integrado más a los países que conforman la zona euro.
Well, the first thing I want to say is a statement about the euro being a success story. It's a strong currency. It has been, it is, and will continue to be, and it has offered stability and fiscal homogeneity and in the European Union as a factor of unity.
Y desde luego España, como todos los países de la zona euro, es responsable de cumplir con el Pacto de Estabilidad, como ha hecho en toda su trayectoria, desde que ingresamos en la Unión Monetaria. Vamos a cumplir reduciendo nuestro déficit para que, tal y como ha fijado la Comisión, en el 2013 estemos otra vez en el 3% del Producto Interior Bruto. Tenemos una trayectoria de país serio y cumplidor, y lo vamos a hacer. Mañana mismo el Gobierno va a aprobar un plan de austeridad, al igual que un plan de reformas en el ámbito de la seguridad social, y he de decir que nuestras condiciones de partida, cuando ha empezado la crisis financiera y económica, eran bastante razonables. Teníamos superávit, 4 años de superávit, y teníamos una deuda 20 puntos por debajo de la media europea, que sigue estando, y en consecuencia una fortaleza del país.
Spain, right now, as every other Eurozone country, is going to meet the Stability Pact requirements. We're doing so, and we're going to be responding to this within the monetary union, and we're going to be reducing the deficit, as agreed by 2013 by 3% of our GDP. And we're a serious country. We always meet with our obligations. Tomorrow, we will be agreeing on a government austerity plan. We will be working on the reform of our social security. And we have to take into account what conditions of our country were when all this started. We had been going through, which were quite reasonable, 4 years of fiscal surplus and over a very long period of time, growth and prosperity.
Thank you very much. And I think certainly for countries looking to the future, something about the banking system. If I can just, Mr. Zapatero, follow up quickly. Spain is a country that was able to become a multinational player, partly through the strength of some of its banks that have gone to Latin America, that come to Britain as well. Are you concerned at all about the health of the banking sector in Spain at this moment? Are they through the woods? You've got some banks that I think are quite exposed and some that are perhaps stronger, but where does the Spanish financial system stand right now?
Debemos ser de los pocos países desarrollados con un cierto tamaño en nuestras economías, como es España, en donde el mapa bancario no ha cambiado nada desde hace 10 años porque la crisis financiera no ha supuesto la quiebra de ningún banco en España. Somos la excepción. Y es más, alguno de nuestros bancos, como el Banco de Santander, ha sido llamado, por ejemplo, a Gran Bretaña, para hacerse cargo, en cierta medida, de los problemas del sector financiero. Hemos aguantado muy bien como sector financiero porque hemos tenido una supervisión y una regulación muy prudencial, y ahora, después de la crisis que se ha producido en el sistema financiero, lógicamente tiene que haber una reestructuración de los pequeños y medianas entidades, de lo que en nuestro país son las llamadas cajas de ahorro, que estamos acometiendo con un programa especial que de aquí a la primavera, antes del verano, producirá una reestructuración importante para adecuarse al nuevo tamaño de la economía, que lógicamente es un tamaño más reducido en el sistema financiero. Pero nuestro sistema financiero, en fin, es un buen ejemplo. Y es un poco chocante que desde determinados ámbitos de opinión, después de lo que hemos visto en países como Estados Unidos, o como en Inglaterra, o como en Alemania, o como en otros, se hable del sistema financiero español cuando debería de ser precisamente para poner en valor la capacidad de resistencia y la buena gestión que nuestro Banco Central ha tenido, con el apoyo del Banco Central Europeo, que es una institución que nos da credibilidad, solvencia y seguridad.
Well, I think a few of the developed countries in economies of a certain size that in which the banking system hasn't actually needed much change because of the crisis, because of what we already had in place. There have been no bankruptcies in Spain in the banking sector, and exceptions, and in fact the Banco de Santander has been called to Great Britain to contribute to improve the financial sector in Britain. And I think it's proven to be quite resilient. In fact, we had significant measures in place already of supervision and regulation. And but of course, after all this, after the crisis, we will be needing to do some restructuring, especially in small and medium-sized banking entities, what we call cajas de ahorro, the savings banks. From here to the summer in order, of course, to scale them down to the new situation. But I think that, as I was saying, the financial system is good, resilient, and it's sometimes been shocking to hear that in the US or Great Britain or in Germany speaking perhaps of the weakness of that financial system when it's actually proven to be one of the most resilient and controlled thanks to our central bank and to the support, the credibility, the security offered also by the BC.
Well, thank you very much.
Sorry, by the ECB.
Thank you for those answers. Let me turn now to Mr. Papandreou. You've had a baptism of fire since you've taken on the Prime Ministership of Greece, and I think the Financial Times is making a lot of money out of coverage, and it's become a little bit, I wouldn't say a soap, but you're certainly finding yourself certainly the center of attention. I mean, Greece, again, is a country that appeared to benefit hugely from its efforts to get into the Eurozone. It's seen some very positive growth, certainly in the last 5 to 10 years, now obviously in the eye of the storm. Where do you see the prospects for Greece? How is Greece coping today with the crisis you're in?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. You are right. I am in popular demand here in Davos on panels, meetings, interviews, and understandably. But it's not the first time I've been in Davos, and I was here another time when, again, I was foreign minister then. I was in popular demand because Greece was a success story. This was just before the Olympic Games. We had a growth of 5% GDP. We had great credibility. Our banking system, which is quite healthy today also, was expanding into the Balkans, and we had become a stabilizing force for the economies in the region. Greek-Turkish relations were on a different pattern, and things were looking very, very positive. But what happened from then to today? Is it the Eurozone that's to blame? I would put, first of all, the blame on us. I don't want to make politics, but in the previous government there was a lot of mismanagement. We did have a huge clientelistic patronage, which was a lot of waste of money. We unluckily developed a lot of corruption at the highest of levels, and we did not take the structural measures to change our economy, to move our economy, to make it more competitive, which Greece can be. We do have a great potential. More competitive within the Eurozone, more competitive as a member of the Eurozone. All these problems, of course, have been exacerbated because of the international crisis. And in fact, what I am saying now in my country, I am saying, well, the international crisis is a very difficult crisis for us, but on the other hand, it has highlighted some of the real problems we have as an economy, and let's make this crisis an opportunity. We have put, and we are determined to get there, 2012, under the 3% Maastricht criteria. This year we'll be cutting 4%, our deficit. There is a credibility gap. That's one of our, I would say that's the first, our first deficit is the credibility gap. And we are moving the next few days in creating an independent statistics bureau with members from the Eurostat on it, and a parliamentary bureau which will be following our budget. We are cutting our budget from wage bill to expenditures, to tax reform, to pension reform in the next few months. By June, these will be laws of the land, and we'll be moving ahead. We are also making huge administrative reforms, which have never been done in previous times, from 5 levels of governance to 3 levels of governance in Greece, cutting down about 6,000 legal entities, and fighting corruption from simple things like putting all our signatures on the internet to more specific ways of the way the Parliament controls and the executive branch. Finally, we have a growth potential. Greece has great potential with 16 billion euro from the structural funds, moving into green energy. We want to make the Aegean the model for green energy, for Europe, for wind energy and solar energy. That's the other side of the coin of the Stability and Growth Program, which we are determined to implement. The Eurozone for us has, with whatever difficulties it may have, has been very important. As you said, the success of Greece in 2004 was, with the Olympics and so on, was very much also supported by the fact that we were in the Eurozone. And today the Eurozone also creates, I would say, a buffer for some of the problems, which will allow us to restructure and move ahead within this context. So we're determined, and we think the Eurozone is an asset for our country and, of course, for Europe.
Well, thank you very much for those comments. Let me turn straight away now to Mr. Zatlers. Mr. Zatlers, Latvia really perhaps has had one of the biggest roller coaster rides within the European Union. One could draw the connection to being inside or outside the Eurozone, but first of all, can you tell us a little bit about how Latvia has coped with this huge shift in its fortunes from being one of the highest GDP growths to obviously having taken one of the largest falls in that time? Where are we today in Latvia, and how are you out of the crisis moment?
We have this Davos mood, rethinking, redesigning, and rebuilding already for a year. But if you look back to the history, Latvian currency was pegged to euro in 2005. And we expected that this peg will drive us to the Eurozone in 3 years. It didn't happen. We didn't get the euro, we got the experience. And the experience is that the government is not fulfilling the fiscal discipline very strictly. We must not think about the Eurozone. Now we have the second attempt. And we had to make a very crucial decision on the third quarter of 2008, whether to abandon the peg and go to the way of devaluation, or to keep the peg and go to the program of internal devaluation. And we have to say we are on the program for a year. And I have to say the program works. We have fulfilled all the targets, and even our budget deficit is lower than we expected. But our very clear exit strategy is to join the euro by the year 2014. That means to meet the Maastricht criteria by the year 2012. And we are not taking the free ride to euro. That's not our decision. We are really ready to fulfill all the criteria. Because the question is, what kind of Eurozone we want to join? We don't want to have just a very, very good label, and which will give us some advantages and of course, higher ratings. We'll take it for granted when we will fulfill all the criteria, because our goal is to really rebuild the sustainability and also the balanced economy of our state. And if the first year of the program has worked, it's a situation then Latvia is like half in because of PEG. But I can't say we are half out, because we are still out, or even I would say yet out. That means we have a clear strategy, and when all the problems will arise in a Eurozone, and we see they are similar to the Latvian ones, and we can serve as an example and also as an experience how we managed in the first year of our program to really stabilize the macroeconomic figures and to get starting for going up and recovery.
Can I ask you quickly, did Latvia suffer, as many Central East European countries did, from people borrowing in other currencies, taking out mortgages in other currencies, then finding flip-arounds in the values of currencies and interest rates?
That is one of the mistakes made by the government, because instead of fighting inflation, because the inflation was only the criteria we didn't meet in 2006 and 2007, the government allowed extensive, borrowing, and allowed also extensive expenditure of the government itself. And there was, of course, the credit rate and interest rates in euros was lower. The euro loans were cheaper, and people make a very simple choice. Take which is cheaper. That was a mistake. And it's very difficult to go to really fight the consequences of these mistakes. But another question, what we see, that we compare the macroeconomic figures of different countries in Europe. There are not too striking differences. Probably, very few really maintain the Maastricht criteria today. And that's also what makes us very confident in our program, because many countries inside the Eurozone just have announced that they have to meet the Maastricht criteria again by the year 2012, 2013, or the same period. That means that we are working all together, those who want to join Euro and those who are in the Eurozone, just to get back the credibility and also the stability of our region. I think we have to follow the same goals. But we also have to little bit pay attention that we need to think about how to supervise and how to really control the systems. To use these instruments, or let's say institutions, to serve as early alert systems to prevent that the Eurozone goes up with very different figures and instabilities.
Thank you very much for those comments. Mr. Trichet, we have three government leaders here. You're speaking, I suppose, on behalf, certainly, of the European Central Bank, but on behalf of all of the members, therefore, of the Eurozone. Let me ask you a very basic question. Is the Eurozone largely out of the woods? I won't ask you the question you might get, is it going to survive? Because I know what the answer, I'm going to get to that one. But are we still in a moment of crisis, or are we stepping out of it? I know that you gave a speech in London not so long ago, and you talked about your concern still that there were exposed loans, that there may be still further shocks to come within the Eurozone economy.
Well, first of all, let me stress that we are speaking of 330 million people, 16 countries. Those countries have decided to unite their destiny within the framework of European Union, within the framework of the institutions that we have decided to have, the framework of a single market and the framework of a single currency within the single market, which is a single economy of the type of the United States of America. And I would say we have to be fully aware of the fact that Greece is not Finland and that Spain is not Germany, exactly as Missouri is not California and Alaska is not Florida. We have diversity in this very vast economy, which is of the size of the United States, exactly as there are diversity in the United States of America in terms of inflation from country to country, in terms of growth, in terms of unit labor cost. So I think we are looking at an entity which is necessarily, because of its size, diverse, with a lot of challenges.
But you wouldn't put it that closely to the US, would you, in terms of, the US has movement of labor, common language, federal transfers. Can you draw that parallel so much between the United States and the Eurozone?
Of course, there are differences. But in the paradox, in some respect, is that in the US you have a lot of specialization on a state-to-state basis, which makes under shock differences to be, from time to time, quite strong. But I fully agree, of course, that we have to look at it very carefully. My warning is only that we are looking at a very vast industrialized economy, which is, again, of the size of the United States. And in that economy, under the stress, under the shock of the most dramatic crisis since 60 years, at least, we had to react, all of us, within our framework, the central bank on the one hand, and the various authorities, whether European or national, on the other hand. If I look at what has been done, I think this euro area, within the framework of European Union as a whole, reacted in a way which obviously was not clumsy, if I may. I don't speak of the central bank, one has to judge, but when I look at the fact that on both sides of the Atlantic, we were able to avoid the depression with approximately the same kind of commitment. And I'm speaking there of governments themselves. They put on the table, because it was necessary to avoid the depression, something like 25% of taxpayer risk, which will not be transformed, of course, in taxpayer spendings, and certainly not in taxpayers' losses, not at all. In some cases, profits. But nevertheless, it was a political capacity to mobilize, and on both sides of the Atlantic, we have approximately the same figure of 25% of the GDP. within a framework which is our own institutional framework, but which is not necessarily very easy because it had to be processed through the various governments that are present and all others. So where do we stand now? I think we are all under stress still. We all have the lessons to be drawn from the crisis, the euro area, Europe as a whole, the US, and all other countries. We were speaking of public finance position, deficits. Let me only remind us that in the euro area, according to the IMF, this year, the overall public finance deficit would be on the order of magnitude of 6%. In the US, the same IMF says that it would be of the order of magnitude of 10%. And in other industrialized countries, it could be equally 10% for Japan, and you know better, perhaps, as a British citizen, what it could be in the UK. So we all have very, very tough issues, both at the level of the euro area as a whole, but in that, consideration, I would say the Stability and Growth Pact worked, even if we are permanently calling for full and rigorous respect of the Stability and Growth Pact in the ECB. I have to say, when I compare with other equivalent industrialized countries, it seems to me that we had a capacity to resist the pressure for destabilization of public finance. And of course, each country has its own individual problem. And I would very much echo what was said by the prime ministers. It is a problem that you have to solve at home because it is your own responsibility and for the sake of your own country, of course.
Let me come back to Mr. Zapatero. I wanted to really ask in the second question, how has it been to be inside the Eurozone? Has it helped? Has it been a hindrance? I think you answered that question partly in your opening statement when you said that you felt that the Eurozone has been a strong currency, it's been successful, and I think you indicated it had been helpful. But you hold the presidency of the European Union right now. Spain does, you do, at a moment of complex, obviously, transition to a president position. But do you think the political coordination between European leaders at that moment of crisis was sufficiently strong? Are you part of a club? Is the Eurogroup of leaders of the European...
Sí, quizá esta es una de las lecciones más interesantes que Europa puede aportar y de las experiencias más enriquecedoras, porque estamos en el tiempo de la globalización y la primera gran crisis económica y financiera de la globalización nos ha dejado una lección compartida universalmente, que es necesario la coordinación y la cooperación de los países y de las regiones. Esto es lo que Europa viene construyendo desde hace décadas. Y el euro es y ha sido un gran apoyo para toda la zona, para los 16 países que nadie va a salir del euro.
Nobody's going to be leaving the euro. No, more countries are going to be joining the euro area in the future. No, the same as no country is intending to leave the European Union. On the contrary, more countries want to join the European Union, and that is the best proof of how successful the project is. The euro area has offered us stability and has enabled us to combat the crisis with a response by the European Central Bank, a monetary response to that has facilitated conditions for our financial institutions, our financial markets, and to continue to be the guarantor of the Stability Pact, which they fulfill very independently together with the Commission. Nobody's going to be leaving the euro, I would like to insist. On the contrary, there will be more countries within the Eurozone. And the Euro Club is a strong club with strong ties of reciprocal support. Let no one be mistaken in this. The 27 have already stated this, and so have the 16. It is true that when the euro was first conceived and it first got going, some people said it wasn't going to be possible, that the euro was going to fail. Then they said it wouldn't last. Afterwards, they said that when the first crisis appeared around the corner,
fracasaría.
it would
Y sin
fail.
embargo,
But
ha demostrado que en
nevertheless,
etapas de crecimiento dado
it has shown
estabilidad,
that during
macroeconómica,
times of growth, it
ha dado
has
estabilidad de
offered
precios,
macroeconomic
ha facilitado la
stability,
integración
price
económica,
stability. It has
y ahora en
facilitated
épocas de
economic
crisis
integration,
ha
and
sabido
now in
resistir.
times of crisis, it has
No hay más que
managed
comparar
to resist.
los diferenciales
All you have to do is
en
compare the
general
spreads in
de los
general
países de la zona euro con
differentials
los que no son
in the
zona euro.
European
Han aguantado mucho mejor los de la
Eurozone
zona
to those that
euro.
aren't in the Eurozone. Those in the Eurozone have
Por
been
tanto,
much more resilient.
ahora lo que tenemos que hacer
And
en
now,
la próxima etapa,
what we
en
need
una
to do
nueva
in the
etapa,
coming stage,
es
in the new,
fortalecer
in this
la
new stage, is to
cooperación y la
strengthen, to reinforce
de los países que
cooperation
tenemos
and
una moneda
coordination
única, un
among
Banco
the
Central
countries with
que tiene la
the single
política
currency, with the central
monetaria.
bank that
Tenemos que cooperar más
establishes the monetary
Tenemos que,
policy. We have to
en el seno de la
cooperate
Unión
much more
Europea,
closely, and within the European
forjar
Union,
más coordinación.
we need
El
to
Eurogrupo
articulate more
tiene que
coordination. The
fortalecerse.
Eurogroup needs, of course, to become stronger.
Socio natural
It's the
del
natural
Banco Central
partner
Europeo, pero si queremos
for
que la
the
moneda tenga el
ECB.
mayor
But if we
respaldo
want the
político
currency to have the
institucional,
greatest
tenemos que
possible political
fortalecer
and institutional
el Eurogrupo.
support, we need to
Todos los países
strengthen the
que
Eurogroup.
formamos parte
And
del
every
euro
country
lo que nos ha
in the
aportado.
Euro
Sabemos lo que nos
knows
jugamos
what it's brought to us, and we
españoles, o como
knew
italianos,
what we were
como griegos o
asking as
finlandeses,
Spaniards,
como europeos.
Italians, Greeks,
Primero como
Finnish,
europeos.
or Europeans.
Tenemos que
First, as
cumplir
Europeans, we know
con
that
nuestras
we have to
responsabilidades.
meet and
Claro
honor
que
our
vamos a
responsibilities, and we are going to be doing so.
a pesar de
Despite
algunas de las voces
some of those voices
analizan
who
rigor, y es bueno al euro,
analyze seriously, and
aunque
it is
algunas de
it's
esas
a
voces son
serious
las que nunca les ha
analysis.
gustado el euro. Ni les gusta
They
que el euro
criticize the
siga
euro, but
ganando espacio
they've never liked the euro. They don't
teniendo
like the euro gaining
fortaleza.
ground. They
Esto hay
don't like a strong
que
euro.
decirlo con
And this
toda
needs to be said very
I'm
clearly.
sure that if President Kaczynski was here, he would probably, President Kaczynski might challenge your conclusion that all those inside did better than those outside, because I think Poland had done reasonably well being outside the euro. Maybe we can come to that in the third part. But I wanted to pick up your other point and turn it to Mr. Papandreou, which is the issue about stability, that the euro, Mr. Zapatero said, brought stability. You're facing, though, at the moment, some interesting swings being inside the euro in terms of bond spreads. It's a bit of a merry-go-round, and it's very difficult to cope with, obviously, as a leader. Are some of the disadvantages in the euro actually there, despite the strong comments that Mr. Zapatero made in favor of the euro?
Well, obviously, the Eurozone is a big step forward to European unification, but at the same time, the policy coordination, as Prime Minister Zapatero has mentioned and has put as one of his priorities in his presidency, is the other side of the coin of what we need to do in the European Union. I would say that first of all, the problem we have, I see it as homemade. So we Greeks are responsible for putting our house into order. The Eurozone will help us in creating the necessary discipline to do so, and give us the motivation to do so. At the same time, what I also have seen from this experience of the last few months is that there is, as Mr. Zapatero said, an attack on the Eurozone by certain other interests, political or financial, and that often countries are being used as the weak link, if you like, of the Eurozone. So we're being targeted particularly with an ulterior motive or agenda. And of course, there is speculation in the world markets. And again, I've seen this. I saw, for example, we had a vote of confidence on Monday when we went out for a loan, and we were oversubscribed by 5 times. Even though it was somewhat expensive, it was also a vote of confidence in our economy. But the day after, there was an article in the Financial Times which said that we were seeking China to buy up our some of our bonds, which didn't exist, neither officially or officially, neither unofficially or officially. The same from the Chinese investors. Neither do they have any contacts with us on this issue, even though everyone would like to diversify their portfolio, but we had no such contacts, and we denied this, of course, and that was considered, and both the Chinese government denied it also, and investors, and that was considered a vote of no confidence to the Greek economy, which changed the spreads immediately and put us in a more difficult position, which shows us that we're in a jittery time. It shows us also that we are there is a lot of speculation. It shows us that even rumors can create problems. But for serious governments that are determined, and we're determined to make the changes and to move forward, I think this is a problem which we're facing. But it also shows that it is good that we're in a common family, because this does create a protection. Now, there are issues, of course, as I would say that a year ago, when I was not in government then, but when the European Union did decide to take some measures concerning the crisis, and there was a fiscal stimulus by many countries, I would have wanted, and I told this to José Manuel Barroso, even though I was in opposition, I would have wanted a more coordinated and a more monitored fiscal stimulus by the European Union. This has nothing to do with the ECB. It has to do with the coordination of the governments of the European Union. Then we would be sure that the impact of the fiscal stimulus would have been even better, and we would have also ensured that some countries, such as mine, would not have gone off on a tangent in their deficits. Unluckily, that was not the case. So I do think we need more coordination, and particularly if we're talking about growth, and if we're talking about labor laws, and we're talking about tax reform, we're talking about green development, we need more coordination. Now, there is also there are other ideas that are there concerning the Eurozone, and please take Greece out of this. I'm sort of talking as a European now and as a Greek, so don't link it with the Greek problem. The issue, for example, of European Union bonds, which would then be more similar to what you have in the United States, where states can, of course, get federal bonds for growth and development. And this, I think, is an idea which is not mine. It's an idea which has been tabled for many countries.
Maybe I'll bring that point up with Mr. Trichet and see his comments on it. But Mr. Zatlers first, I just want to get to one of your comments about the Eurozone. You said you laid out the timetable that Latvia still has for wanting to join the Eurozone. Do you think the entry criteria should be changed? Do you think we should... They were created for a particular time, a particular period, and maybe even for particular countries. But are these still the right criteria?
Of course, there's a temptation to decrease the criteria because most of the countries of Eurozone does not meet the criteria today. But as I said before, we are not going for free ride to Euro, because the Euro is just the framework for us to rebuild our economy. That means we are going to meet the criteria under the definite program to a definite time. And in February, the government will make a statement that this is 2014, and we had to join. And that there are joint efforts of the government and the central bank and also of the social partners. There's a broad support of this program. And why we are so confident? Because, let's say, it was a very criticized decision not to devaluate, but to keep the peg. And now, a year later, even the critics of this program admit that the program works. So, and we got the confidence in the first year of the program, and the confidence is that brings us to the goal, and the goal is to rebuild a healthy, sustainable economy. And as mentioned before, the Stability and Growth Pact is of great value, because the Euro Club is a club of equals. And the equality is limited to these Maastricht criteria. And we should admit it. The diversity and all the other things, but the main thing is to keep the criteria. We all want to join the club that is the same reputation as it was when it was created.
Mr. Trichet, we've had a number of comments. You might want to react to a couple of the ideas that have been put forward here, but how do you manage, and how will you manage, a Eurozone with such diverse economies at this moment of crisis, that are emerging from a moment of crisis, at the same time as you've got countries obviously on the outside wanting to come in, is it a very different proposition to the proposition that you faced during that period of growth?
No, I would say very fortunately on the fiscal side, we have a framework since the very beginning. At the time, this Stability and Growth Pact was challenged, including by big countries. We made the point that it was the absolute necessary counterpart to the monetary union itself, because we cannot have a monetary union if we do not have a framework for the fiscal policies, peer surveillance, and peer capacity to engage in recommendation, which is the case. And it seems to me that what has been done recently is exactly what has to be done. Very good work by the Commission, very difficult meditation of the governments. And, Mr. Prime Minister, you have a program for with the appropriate timing. You have a program, Prime Minister Papandreou, and so forth. And of course, we are there, I would say, the Commission and the ECB and the peers, to look at that program and see to it to be fully implemented. So that exists, and this is appropriate. But we have exactly the same problem in the other major industrialized countries. They have to work out programs and be sure that they honor their program and reach the goal. And the goal is very simple. It's the same for all of us. It is to be back to a sustainable position in order to reinforce confidence today, confidence of the household, confidence of the entrepreneurs, and confidence of the market. And this confidence is a single entity, if I may, and it is necessary for the recovery to be as active as we hope. Now, we have also, and I fully subscribe to what Prime Minister Zapatero said, as President of Europe, we have to improve the surveillance, which is not, I would say, in a framework, in an institutional framework, but surveillance of the implementation of structural reforms. And that's very important. That has been decided by the heads, and it is to be implemented. And we have also the permanent surveillance of the evolution of competitive indicators in the various economies in the euro area, which is also something that the Commission has engaged to do on our own recommendation, and I trust that it has to be done. But this is no time for complacency. For all of us, it's hard time, and hard work has to be done at the level of the euro area, at the level of Europe as a whole. Very hard work. But again, not of a different nature of what you're observing in the other major industrialized country.
Well, maybe we can come back to a few of the points that have been raised so far, but I do want to draw the audience in. We've got people who've battled through the snow to come and join this session today and come and participate in this session on the Eurozone. I can see we have people with microphones on each side. I'm going to take maybe 2 or 3 questions to try and group a few in and maybe direct them to different members of the panel, or you may want to direct them yourselves. Please do say who you are, who you work for, and please keep it to a short question so we can get as many in as possible. No statements, thank you. I'm going to take the person in the middle of the row, go back a bit, that one there. Yep. And now I can see who it is.
I'm Charles Grant from the Centre for European Reform, a think tank in London. I have a question for George Papandreou. You've said what you should say. You say you're trying to do all the right things, but surely the problem is that in your country, it's very hard to see how any government, however gifted and however wise, how can it be capable of reforming the underlying political and social structures which prevent economic reform, which prevent budgetary consolidation, which prevent productivity rises? How can you possibly convince us that you can restore the health of your underlying economic structures?
Let's hold that question in. Thank you very much. And there's a gentleman just in front of you here with a white shirt, then I'll come to the back. Yep.
It's Sean O'Grady from The Independent. This is a question particularly for Monsieur Trichet, which is how far now do you think the private financial system, the banks in other words, are from returning to anything like normality, and how much do they still depend on huge public funds and subsidy?
And there's a gentleman at the back, yes, with his hand up very insistently. I'm looking down here. Yeah, I'll come this. I'll take these 3 and then we'll chance for a couple more.
Question to Prime Minister Papandreou and perhaps President Jean-Claude Trichet. Tjomir Kamanov, Commercial League Bulgaria.
Sorry, could you please say who you are? Could you please say who you are? Sorry, the person asking the question. Could you please say who you are?
Timur Kamenov, Bulgarian Cardiac Institute.
Yeah, okay.
Prime Minister Papandreou, you're a devoted European and a very good lawyer by training and practice, I remember. Do you believe that blocking borders is a good behavior of a member of European Union and would be possible for Greek government to accept liability vis-à-vis Bulgaria? And second question, are you envious about Bulgaria entering Eurozone next year? Thank you very much.
I'm going to take those three, and then I'll come, if you can hold that question, I'll come to the middle in a minute. I think the first question is really the elephant in the room. The productivity changes, the structural changes, which are now absolutely, I would have thought, vital, given the kind of deficit and debt burdens that most EU, Eurozone, as well as EU countries are starting to live under. Mr. Zapatero, you made lots of good statements, obviously, about what you wanted to do and what you'd like to do, but the issue of labour, deregulation, education to increase productivity. What steps is the Spanish government taking right now to convince, let's say, people like the questioner about the commitment to structural change?
Sí, muy bien. Me gustaría hacer algún matiz introductorio muy brevemente sobre la política que estamos haciendo y los cambios que queremos llevar adelante. El primer matiz es recordar que nuestro país tiene 20 puntos menos que la media de la Unión Europea de deuda pública. Ha crecido, pero tiene 20 puntos menos. Por ejemplo, otro dato. Dedicamos al pago de la deuda el 5% de los ingresos. Francia y Alemania dedican el 6%. Quizá este dato se desconoce, pero es un dato de Moody's y, por tanto, me parece relevante. España tiene que ganar productividad. Para ello es fundamental que sigamos incrementando el esfuerzo en investigación, desarrollo e innovación. El Gobierno que presido ha duplicado esa inversión. Es fundamental hacer un fortalecimiento de nuestro sistema educativo, pero he de recordar que en estos momentos España está entre las 7 primeras en cuanto a las que reciben más inversión en el mundo.
Our economy is one of the top 7 in terms of growth and investment in the world, and in terms of what we've been hearing, it certainly seems that we're gaining competitiveness. Over the last 2 quarters, we've been gaining market share in international trade. So that's the situation we find ourselves in. Now, we will be making reforms, the first in the area of austerity and ensuring that there are restrictions in chapters 1, 2, and also in terms of investments. We need to reform social security, and we will do so, and to ensure that we have a system which is viable in 15, 20 years' time. And in so doing, strengthen social protection. We'll also be changing our labour institutions, particularly in the area of collective bargaining, in the area of job mobility, and the area of the ease of hiring, particularly for young people and people who, as a consequence of the high level of unemployment in our country and who don't have qualifications, have great difficulty actually getting in to the labour market. Now, we are going to have to explain all this to the Spanish people. But the Spaniards, since they have been democrats, since they have become members of the European Union, have recognized that they have duties towards modernizing, strengthening their economy, their social protection, and the record there is impeccable. So I think what's essential here, and I'll finish on this, I think that as a European and as a Spaniard, the Eurozone and the European Union is not going to give up its model of social protection, its model of social cohesion. It's not going to give up its social model. We want the most competitive economies in the world, but we also want social cohesion. We will not ever accept to gain competitiveness to the detriment of social cohesion and social protection. And what does that mean? We have to be more competitive, we have to be more innovative, we have to work a great deal. But I believe in Europe we can do that. And once again, we're showing signs in Europe that we can do that, as we have done in the past.
Pass that same question actually on to Mr. Papandreou. In particular, it may be therefore that the euro and being in the eurozone is an external actor, a forcer of change, may even accelerate it. In these kind of structural change, will you be taking similar kind of very structural steps of the sorts that Mr. Zapatero alluded to?
Yes, it is. I would very much agree with Mr. Zapatero that the Eurozone is also something which allows us for greater discipline. But I would also, in that, answer the question, the two questions that were addressed to me, that what is your credibility? And I have said in my country that our biggest deficit is the credibility deficit. It's not the financial deficit. Today, every Greek citizen realizes the problem, and I think this is the first point I want to make. They realize we need to change. And it is deeply understood that we need to make deeper changes, deep structural changes. And it'll be painful for all, but people are determined. I get this on the streets. When I talk to people, they are determined to support our stability and growth program, which is very specific. Secondly, we came on a mandate of change. We were recently elected. We knew what the problems are. We didn't know maybe the depth of the problems, such as the deficit, but we knew what the structural problems were. So we're not talking about something different. We're just talking about compressing it in time and making it more quickly and more credibly, so that in very short time, the international markets will be able to see that what we say we mean, and we've already started the implementation. And we have a strong mandate in Parliament. We have a large majority. Thirdly, we have been successful in the past. This is not a question of DNA. This is a question of political will. And the political will is there, and we have been able to do it in the past when big issues, such as whether it was becoming part of the Eurozone, whether it was revamping our infrastructure, whether it was organizing the Olympic Games when everybody said a small country like Greece can't organize the Olympic Games. We organize the Olympic Games in the best of manner. We can when we decide. And so yes, we can, I would say. And thirdly, and finally, the competitiveness of our economy. That's a major issue, but Greece has potential. Whether it's its tourist industry, whether it's agriculture industry, whether it's its services industry, its banks, we have potential. And this is what we will be banking on, but of course we need to restructure. Just to answer the Bulgarian question, I think that's one more piece of evidence of the determination. There are major problems in our agriculture. I will be the first to say that, and I will be the first to admit that. So we need to restructure. Greece could become a country of high quality, ecological, biological, Mediterranean products and exporting and industry and so on, rather than at this point being in a deficit even in this area. Link it with tourism, link it with green development and so on. But what I have said to those who are protesting and who are closing off the borders even towards Bulgaria, and I very much am in solidarity with your Prime Minister, Mr. Borisov. We're in contact with each other. I have said we are not going to give handouts just like that, just to spend money, just to stop the strikes and to stop the tractors on the road. We have a stability and growth program, and we will be credible and determined to put it into action. And that means that not €1 will be spent wastefully. We will be sitting with them to make the structural changes in a program we have to help them change. But just to throw out money, we will not do that, and that's determination. That, I think, is another point of credibility we have.
I'm going to turn, as we're coming very close to the end of the panel here. Let me just take in the last question from the person who's at the front, and we will come, and I'll give a chance both to Mr. Zatlers and to Mr. Trichet to finish.
Thank you. It's Chris Giles from the Financial Times. It's a question to George Papandreou. Is it time, given the market difficulties you've been having, and you've had some more today with another widening of spreads between you and the German Bunds, for you not only to have a vote of confidence in your own credibility, to get other European Union countries maybe to give you a loan? Are you talking to the French and the Germans about borrowing money from them as a vote of confidence to show that they have confidence in your ability to meet the pledges you made?
While you're thinking of your answer to that question, and we are coming, can I just ask for a 1 minute comment perhaps from Mr. Trichet on the issue of private banks, which was the previous question, and any other comment you want to make, but we do need to finish in the next 2 minutes.
Yeah, only to say that we are calling our commercial banks to be as transparent as possible. It is a general call coming from on both sides of the Atlantic, everywhere in the world. Our understanding is that the main issue now is for them to restructure their balance sheet, I would say be as much as possible in a position to do their job, which is to finance the real economy. They have to do that, and they have to do that by all possible means, namely putting aside their profits and not distribute large deals of dividends in order to reinforce their balance sheet and their reserve. They have to be very keen on not distributing packages and remuneration and bonuses, but to put that to the strengthening of their balance sheet. They, when it is possible, have to go to market, as they did, I have to say, on this side of the Atlantic too, to reinforce their stocks and their own funds, their capital. We are encouraging them to do all what is necessary to do their job, which is to finance the real economy. And to do that in a fashion which would permit to accompany the recovery. We see the credit outstanding being quite low, even negative, for the non-financial corporate in the Eurozone right now, which is not abnormal after the deepest recession since World War II. But we have to take care of no supply constraint as regards credit when the demand of credit would be much more active, which should take the place with the recovery which is going on.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Zatlers, I'm going to turn to Mr. Papandreou for a final comment to answer that question. Is that okay? Thank you very much. Mr. Papandreou, you had a last question, then we'll wrap up.
Well, I think the answer is very, very simple. We went for borrowing 2 days ago, and we were oversubscribed 5 times. So we're not looking anywhere else for, and we haven't asked for money from the European Union. We get structural money, but it's not. So I think that was a vote of confidence. We have been taking measures which, please look at them. We have terminated thousands and thousands of contracts of employees in the public sector. We're cutting down on the wage bill. We're creating a statistics, which is going to be a statistics bureau, which is going to be completely independent. Even Eurostat will be on the board. We are moving ahead and cutting down the deficit this year by 4%. Any other country cutting down by 4%, I think, would be seen as a major success. So keep your eyes on us, but we'll be confident that what we say we will be doing.
Let me just close up on 4 quick points that I would take away from this panel. The first, at least to this point, the euro appears to have, from the Eurozone, appears to have provided a zone on balance of stability rather than of crisis, or certainly in terms of the way that it's been handled and the way that you've experienced it. The need for greater political coordination is probably important, and I think this is maybe partly the question that was asked at the end, the sense that people aren't alone, but they are in it together, the sense of political commitment, given the theory of the no bailout clause, but the reality probably of political solidarity, I think probably needs underscoring now and again. And then I think the issue that structural reform is now inescapable for a number of countries in Europe, and in a way the euro and being in the Eurozone will be part of the discipline to follow through on that structural reform. Certainly we'll wait and see whether you as leaders are able to achieve this. Mr. Trichet will be involved watching from the sidelines. Could you please give a strong hand to our 4 panelists who I thought did a great job.